Давайте начнем нашу сессию, которая будет посвящена следующему десятилетию. А если мои коллеги, участники сессии, будут готовы рассуждать о более длительной перспективе, я буду только рад. Если мы будем говорить о более длительной перспективе, о следующем десятилетии, 20-летии российского финансового рынка, позвольте представить их. Сегодня со мной Владимир Верхошинский, главный управляющий директор Альфа-банка, Владимир Чистюхин, первый заместитель председателя Центрального банка,
Russia, Nikolai Zhuravlev, Deputy Chairman of the Federation Council. We're going to be shortly joined by Alexei Moiseev, who is the Deputy Minister of Finance. And by a remote link, we have Anatoly Aksakov, who is the Chairman of the Russian Parliamentary Committee for Banks, and the President of the National Association of Pension Funds, Sergei Belyakov. And so it is about the future of the Russian financial market that we're going to talk. I believe it is correct to state that throughout the past 10 years, both the industry and the regulator have jointly done a lot. Well, it is not accidental that I am moderating this panel, and henceforth I would like to offer to you a bit more critical view upon the level of the development of the Russian financial market the way I see it. To my regret, it seems to me that the Russian financial market hasn't attained the kind of place that we've been expecting it to. I mean, in the meantime, it hasn't the kind of place that it deserves in the Russian economy. If you take a look at many of the performance indicators which describe the level of the development of the financial market, we discover that many of them are lower than those which we see with respect to both the mature as well as emerging economies, and some of them are even less than what we had back in 2007. The Russian financial market is one of those, regrettably, one should say, kind of markets that wasn't able to fully recover after the 2008 crisis. Just see for yourself. The capitalization of the Russian stock market equals right now approximately 535 billion US, and is about 25% of the national GDP, while back in 2007 it was 99%. And it was 1.3 trillion. Throughout this time, the world capitalization grew almost 1.5. The volume of the stock trading currently equates to 260 billion US, which is 11% of GDP, while back in 2007, the turnover of the exchange stock market was half of it. About 60–65% remains as the capitalization, which is within the biggest Russian banks, and many Russian economic sectors are not represented in the Russian market capitalization. Just 72 papers have had relative liquidity during the past 10 years. The capacity of the debt market, effectively, is not that sizable, continues to remain about 26% of the GDP. And so in this sense, we are behind. I mean, actually, we have already introduced Alexei Moiseev, and so he joins us, the Deputy Minister of Finance. It is true that the Russian exchange market is the place that the retail investor has come to. Sometimes we're talking about 23 million brokerage accounts opened by them. But if you take a closer look at the statistics, we can see that there are about 10 million funded accounts only. But speaking about the amount of assets which exceed more than 10,000, they're just 4 million. But together with 800,000 of fiduciary customers, along with the holders of the mutual investment funds, are represented by those who are simultaneously brokerage customers. which shows that real retail investors in the Russian market, there are just about 11 to 12 million, no more. Presumably, it would be proper to discuss this by our panel. Agree or disagree with this? As it seems to me, the solution of the main problem of the Russian stock market is in this primary, insufficiently developed or active IPO market, which cannot be resolved as the problem until all of such performance indicators aforementioned are seriously improved. And I'm talking about this as a problem, as a challenge. And if you see it as a challenge, then you are propelled to start looking for the resolution thereof. And that is why, when here at the session I'm talking about the measures dedicated to the development of the financial market in Russia and various challenges that we may find a resolution to, I hope that we will talk about measures that may facilitate such an outcome. So, I would like to suggest that we should have our panelists talk about the following matters. Can you phrase some sort of a formula, the way you see it, describing the development of the financial market in the next decade, or, if you will, within the period that you believe to be more proper? I can suggest that so far that was in the area of bringing in retail investors. Maybe that was not the formula that we've been guided by from the very beginning, but at least these are the guidelines within which we thought measures that could be more sustainable, more appropriate, more timely. As far as the banks are concerned, one may say that this formula was in providing for the stability and the development of the retail lending, like for insurers, life insurance products, as far as non-government pension funds are concerned, cleaning the industry from the negligent and undue in terms of the ethics participants. So what I'm trying to say is that when responding to this question, I would like you to describe the way you see the correlation between the financial market sector, whether more emphasis should be put upon the financial market as such or to some individual sectors, whether the same kind of emphasis should be put upon raising the retail investors, or this is something that one shouldn't be worried about anymore. What kind of financial market development should take in terms of shape for the institutional investors? What will be the tool set in it, debt-based or share-based? And so I would ask Vladimir Chistuchin to take the first pass. I'm sure that the central bank has answers to all these questions. Vladimir, please. Alexei, thank you very much. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Well, I'm trying to always hedge myself and say that if the central bank had answers to all of the questions, then with our will and our resources, we've a long time ago had overcome all these hurdles. But no, I believe that on this panel we should talk about what is key within the context of our midterm development. Maybe for some, 10 years represents a long-term kind of time frame, and try and discover the most important thing that may help us to succeed. You began your question with a phrased formula. An idea was very close to me, the one that during the previous session was mentioned by Igor Zhuvalov, which is building a regional financial center. Although quite often, whenever people talk about financial centers or use the word regional or international, do mean in the first place bringing in foreign players, I don't think anything prevents us from considering financial center as the kind of a hub where all of the Russian and foreign entities would like to come in, where they would like to save and invest, and principally speaking, what kind of an infrastructure they would want to develop their financial investments and utilize financial instruments. And this formula of setting up a regional financial center is as vital as never before, seemingly, one may tend to think that the best time has already been missed, because when we tried moving along the strategy of developing an international financial center in the middle of the 2000s, we were saying that there are several key elements to such a system, and the financial market as such is just one very important, but still a piece of a grander type of a system. But when we talk about the financial market, yes, it is first of all about the tools and systems, but I do see this kind of a market as the one that has already matured. Yes, we may add some fine-tuning it. We should develop something further. We should arrive at a better understanding of utilizing certain financial assets in it, but principally speaking, this is a proven working system. But as far as other elements are concerned, it's a bit more difficult, because I would definitely like to highlight the business environment as well as legislation. And whenever I say legislation, no matter how bland that might sound, that property protection, insolvency protection, litigation, so I believe there's a lot of potential to principally improve things here. We are talking a lot about making our financial market into such a function that would raise the interest both on sell side and buy side, and overall trust. It's a classical thing. We've been talking about investors at length, but let's talk about the issuers, the ones who would like to issue their instruments to the financial market, against which kind of conditions your placement and the kind of instruments that you may offer are going to be bought. We've been talking a lot about shared instruments, what a potential shareholder requires, an understanding of what a business is all about, at least generally, its development strategy, and secondly, to enjoy certain dividends. So I would say that particularly recently, we've got a lot of problems both with the first and the second element, because we have considerably closed the information. Yes, there has been some serious reason to it, but what we're seeing right now, this environment is comfortable for majority owners, and so we need to do everything in order to separate things in terms of the fines discrimination, so as to be able to disclose some information, if not all information, to the investors. We do ascertain a non-very positive dividend policy, but in a cumbersome situation, it is impossible to expect it to be any other than that. And so the question is, why, against such an attitude towards placement, why should you do that? If you are thinking about it that way, why should you enter the financial market with any sort of a placement? So it seems to me that a very considerable level of care, not by the central bank but by the government, is to turn the table around in order to invest into the minds of the big corporates and middle-sized and small companies, the understanding that it is quite lucrative to raise money from the market. That can be done technically. It's not complex. But the second, not least important thing is not just about placing some stock, because you may recall that at some former stage, the pension funds really had this kind of an attitude. We first raise money, and then we will do whatever we want with it without any commitments. You take money from your investors, and you've got to provide them with certain entitlements and rights. As I said, this is in the first place, it's the right to have the information disclosed so as to understand what happens or what will happen to the company as well as to the dividend payment. Now, the second point, just a bit more about the buy side, about the investors. It is truly about certain significant decisions that we've recently made, which, from the point of view of the regulators and ours, may help to grow long-term investment via the capital market. But alongside with that, I have this inner feeling that we've allowed for certain compromises which may slow down this reform in a certain way. For example, the long-term savings program, I used to talk about it, let me say it again, without a certain soft nudging towards entering into the system for the purpose of protecting the interests of at least the employees, this idea will hardly become popular, or the pension funds or the banks, which may become the agents of that system, will have to offer super attractive terms in order for a potential investor to trust such long-term investments within this period of uncertainty. As Sergei Shvetsov said, with all kind of clouds around, it would be difficult to hope for any longevity or consistency in it. What I mean to say is that investors would need to take another close look at it once the systems start working and possibly start fine-tuning them without waiting for a long-term period for them to produce something, like in the case of the digital financial assets. Well, thankfully, businesses have been helping us quite strongly, and so all such changes were taking place very expeditiously. So let me finish with that. But I would like to say that the banking sector is the locomotive. That won't change, but we need to support our colleagues through the development institutions and through the capital market to the extent possible. Now, let me wrap it up. What I hear is that the issuers see their presence in the market as a favor that they're offering, and they need to be called upon in order to act on something that the issuers are usually trying to do, being interested in raising funding. So they view the market seriously as the source of financing. And they may also think that the market is insufficient, whether I'm understanding it correctly, is not sufficient in terms of serving them as the source of funding. Secondly, long-term investments appear in such a way that individuals on their own don't have a lot of stimulus in order to use the kind of proposals that come their way, and one will have to force them to use such proposals. Do I need to respond to that? Yeah. Well, this is not a favor. It's just that there are different optional, there used to be different alternative channels which allowed funding to take place, either the banking channels, which continue to operate, but these are less long-term channels, and in the very same token, they are limited in their capacities simply because of the restricted risk of an appetite on the part of the financial organizations because of their responsibility for the liabilities of the retail investors. And the second channel was the one by raising foreign investments, which strongly incentivize the development of the capital market, like disclosing information to minorities. But when foreign investors left, this whole thing really imploded. But the internal culture, as we see, hasn't yet become strong enough. What I agree with is that there are certain factors which impact the financial market success are outside of the central bank toolkit. The entrepreneurial market, in terms of the strong effect, yes, but the leverage that the central bank may have on it is not significant. And that is the way I see, in terms of what you've just said, what can be done within the competences that the central bank has. Alexei, I'm sorry to say, the central bank has a lot of things, and we are not, shunning the responsibility. And what I mean to say is that we need to take a very complex look at all things and move along the way together with the government. Okay, I'm just trying to hypothesize about the market factors, which I may describe as very kind of chronic illnesses for the financial market in Russia. This is not just about the kind of losses that it incurred in the financial market. And it looks like 2022 and its results forces us to look for other means and ways to deal with the kind of challenges that remain. I would ask next Alexei Moiseev. Alexei, we're talking about what needs to be done. What will serve as the formula for the development of the financial market over the next 10 years? I do see that the concept of incentivizing long-term investments has quite a priority place. To what extent it seems to be effective, and can one rely upon it as a real effective mechanism to raise funding and activate business, because in the first place, it's about the institutional investors becoming active in the financial market. Well, thank you very much, Alexei. With your permission, I would like to begin with a certain lyrical deviation, and I would like to congratulate Nikolai Andreevich on his birthday and disclose publicly my deep respect and love for him. I can finish with that, but if you want me to continue, I am happy to. Well, all right, dear colleagues, but on a serious note, when I was listening to Alexei, I recalled a story. I mean, there were quite a few of them, because they were all heroic ones to different levels, but somehow I recalled that in 1979, because of the introduction of the limited contingent of the Soviet troops into Afghanistan, sanctions have been initiated against the USSR. The USSR at that time was building the Urengoy-Pomary-Uzhgorod pipeline, because there were a lot of news about it. As part of the sanctional pressure, the certain specific pipes were prohibited to be supplied. I'm not going to give you the specific gauge. Well, there were some sort of very special pipes that were not produced in the USSR. In a very short period of time, the manufacturing of these pipes was set up, and so that pipeline really met its schedule. It was not the young communist league kind of a storm construction effort. Certain market forces were involved in that process. But the question, why didn't they start looking for these pipes earlier? Because it was easier to buy them. And the same thing is what I would like to refer to the Russian financial market. So, riveting back to the threshold of the 2010s, the setting up of the Megaregulator, a lot of services were being outsourced, including such basic infrastructure services that it is strange to imagine that one had to go and buy them from the foreign suppliers, because I do remember very well that back in the 0 years, the life assurance services were being sold by foreign agents. There were several Swiss banks which I believe knocked on almost everybody's door. I'm not going to mention their names because you will recall it. And at that point in time, many people somehow, and because of no credible reason, were setting up accounts abroad. I'm very grateful that this whole thing has been prohibited. I also closed my accounts, and that is why I didn't suffer any losses because of it. But generally speaking, that was the kind of the routine thing. And then when in 2014 it became very difficult and unsafe, amongst other things, what we eventually can feel is the pride for the infrastructure that we're currently having, because I do believe it's one of the best ones in terms of financial services. You know, when you hear somebody telling during certain meetings that we've got good infrastructure, you know, everybody's saying, you know, all right, let's pass this one because nobody's interested to hear it anymore. But in 2015, that was quite a challenge. So nowadays, what I'm thinking is that, yes, indeed, we have imported services of short money transfer, conversion into very long-term kind of money. So we've mastered how to do that, but much longer-term money we haven't learned to, because that kind of a service was easy to buy from other different countries, from the West, not only from the West. So currently we are in a kind of a situation like the USSR was with those kind of pipes back in 1979. And so, Alexei, I know that, like some say, you know, a pessimist is a well-informed optimist. So, so always, you know, listening to you, you are kind of prophesying bitter news. Well, you know, my bitter news at the regular conferences is something that many are currently missing. Well, you may be true, you may be right, but if one can always rely on laurels and think that everything is good, so we definitely need to have people who would be pointing into the different direction, like you do. But overall, it's going to be a very difficult job for all of us, but inevitably, this is what we'll have to do. And so I'm sure that we'll be able to persevere. And I believe that we have come to the kind of point in time when generally we have very closely come to developing the necessary infrastructure for the household. I mean, not only for the professional players in the financial market, but for the households as well. Like I am describing it as a strategic triad, there is already an act in place. We would need to further amend it and improve it. There's a whole thing, and as far as the taxation is concerned and other points. But that's the way we have agreed so far, because clearly, if everybody may remember, or somebody may remember, the initial system that we had, which was a temporary one, is principally different in one thing: the level of voluntary joining it. Well, we'll leave and see. We will start and then we'll see what we need to do. So I'm very happy that finally the first draft act was passed into law as far as the shared life insurance. So as long as I work in the Ministry of Finance, I recall the debate going on about it. And so I'm very hopeful that during the last session in the Parliament it will be possible to really pass this act through the second and the third reading. As long as Mr. Aksakov might facilitate that, I'm sure that will happen. Now, the third point, Anatoly Gennadievich supported that draft act, and only because of his very solid support, it really passed through. So thank you so much. And the third thing, the third one, somehow we have agreed about all the aspects, and I'm very hopeful that it would be possible to move it from the government into the Russian parliament within the next few weeks. So, God willing, I'm really afraid to mention it, that these three basic elements, they are going to be finally completed in terms of the legislation towards the end of this year. Yes, I mean, all of these acts are not going to be perfect. And clearly, all of it will have to be further improved. But when this morning we spoke with the Minister about his forthcoming presentation, and we saw it as being quite retrospective, we all recall the OSAGO market, which is the motor liability insurance. We worked on it, and basically it ended up not being exactly what we wanted it to be. So I'm sure that the same case is right now. It's not that as of January 1st, 2024, 50% of the population will come into the stock market, because you need to take into account the well-being as well, like in that cartoon movie about the Prostokvashino village with these cartoon characters who discuss that in order to buy something that you don't need, you need to sell something that you don't need. So nevertheless, I am quite confident that there's great power of the market interest through the cross-selling, hopefully not mis-selling, and all of our efforts put together, we will see the success. Because back in 2015, remember, during the conference in Hayat, everybody was saying there, no, if only 100,000 people will buy something, that will be a great thing. But we're saying 10 million accounts are being held there, so it's nothing. I do recall that in between 2015 to 20 is an absolutely fantastic forecast that there's going to be 1 million accounts. I remember it quite well. So eventually, so I'm really sure that the one who makes the first step will really complete the journey. So I'm sure that our market is going to be the market of the retail investor, and most of the retail investors are going to be investing through the collective investment instruments, through the mutual funds, and mutual investment funds, and insurance companies. And certainly, basically, neither we nor the population here has any other choice but for the money from the retail investors to flow into the stock market. Like in the case of Iran, which has been under the sanctions for 40 years, things are flourishing there. I've been fidgeting with my smartphone just to find information. So 30% of the Iranian citizens have brokerage accounts. And I believe that this particular level is fully attainable. It's just that nobody really needed it in the past. So we have any other choice right now, Alexei. That's what I think. Now, may I further ask you specifically, the concept to incentivize long-term savings is based upon the investors with an investment horizon from 15 to 20 years, if I understand correctly. How realistic you believe it is to hope to have such investors if we talk about retail ones, in a sense that we need to conceive a way to fulfill the assets and then have institutional investors dispose of them? I believe this is without any doubt. That's the way it should be, but how realistic it is? Well, look, I certainly agree with the previous statement that many issues do consider the stock market as a certain burden, and that's exactly where you would need to really nudge them forward. For example, I'm not going to quote to you percentages, but definitely the prevalent majority of transactions is between blue chips. So people just sell something, buy another thing. Well, clearly that is not really a good thing. But I recall back in 1990, it was common to criticize the Swedish economic model. One of such indicators of the stalemate in that economy was that the fact that from 1927 to 1997, only 30% of companies were renewed in their index list. So in our case, only a couple of companies appeared in it over the past 20 years. So people need to have something new and newer. It's not because human beings are very strange and unpatriotic and have bought a lot of foreign stock. It's just that it's interesting. There's quite a big choice there. And so you have to have a supply. In order for the demand to be, you need to have a supply. And so in this sense, I believe that there's a consensus in our executive power that certain elements of forcing people into that need to be introduced. And so that's what is currently we are thinking about in order to grow our number of IPOs. This is the first thing. Now, the second thing, from the point of view of the readiness, I believe people are more ready right now. They may not be aware of it, but I'm sure that they are more interested to invest longer term. And in the first place, this can be explained by the fact that the 2022 financial crisis, that was the first crisis in my memory, even 1994 financial crisis, I remember, when we didn't have any difficult issue to deal with. I mean, without mentioning the banks or the brokerages who would borrow money and would flop. I mean, no, there was not a problem like that, and that is a colossal tribute to the central bank. I mean, the fact of the matter is that during the very difficult crisis, people didn't lose money. There was a lot of market volatility. Some became frozen. Others would make acquisitions through Western structures. But we work on all such things because you may remember that last week certain initiatives have been announced. The Minister of Finance made a statement on the central TV channels. That is a colossally important factor, but that factor won't deter retailers from long-term investment. The second one, definitely tax incentives and tax benefits. Clearly, all of the draft legislation are based upon long retention of money. And so people need to retain their money for a longer period of time. Because even now we're having arguments that whether one should need 3 years or 5 years, but we don't want it to be less than 10 years in order for that tax incentives to work fully. Somebody joked, I remember, among the members of your association, Alexei, in order to stimulate people normally, through taxes, you need to exempt them 50%. That's not the way we think. We believe that the first financial crisis experience shows that people, if they are being given 13 to 15%, would be ready to voluntarily freeze their accounts. And thirdly, a third factor is the yield, the profitability. I mean, throwing this question back into the room here, dear colleagues, we need to provide for the profitability. As long as the deposit income is higher by a mere percentage than the stock market, people would keep their market in the banks. Yes, and when we were given this opportunity to vote for one of the biggest achievements of the central bank, macroeconomic stability, that's what we went to, because that is the prerequisites of the investment activity. This is something that we truly should be grateful for to the central bank and the government, for the kind of stability which enabled people to start thinking about investing. And the financial institutions, Nikolai Andreevich, you being the legislature, what is the way you see the next 10 years? 10-year period, although I feel that nobody is answering this question. But nevertheless, how do you see the next decade? What do you expect as a legislator from the core government agencies and the industries? Alexei, thank you very much. Well, first I should say that I didn't expect over the past few years even that Mrs. Nabiullina will connect the Megaregulator's birthday to mine, because this is a very special day for me. So it's not only my birthday, but this is the anniversary of our very dear central bank. I would like to talk in the first place about the central bank's accomplishments, hope being that in the future the very same trend shall sustain, although Dmitryevich and Alexei Vladimirovich very precisely have described their understanding of the future of the central bank, because I do say that its development should be more ambitious, covering a broader spectrum of things. But once again, I shall say that the journey that the central bank has covered so far over the past 10 years is very impressive. This is the experience that has always been accompanied under the star of preserving, filling out for the balance between very diverse interests, starting from the very important function of the development of the financial market, which countered, as the governor previously stated, to protect the rights of the consumers, to prevent losses in this fast-paced development and turbulent financial market. And similarly, marking the weights in between the corporate development and the resolution of the market, the titanic kind of an effort that the central bank undertook, which couldn't be resulting in the slowdown of the corporate sector funding and different industry sectors vis-à-vis the development of bubbles in this market, like the mortgage market, which is the continuous topic for the discussion between the central bank and the professional community, I mean the developers and builders, about how this market should develop into the future. And so it seems to me that the position of the central banks is an absolutely correct one. So all of the past 10 years have had this continuous argument in between the market and the central bank, their supervision over what they have been doing, all the way to these unusual functions like developing competition in the market put into its responsibility. So the central bank has made gigantic steps forward in setting up financial and payment infrastructure, exchange infrastructure, which undoubtedly have become the main token for the financial sovereignty, the results of which we saw evidencing itself some 12 months ago, when all of the global players from that or that infrastructure exited the Russian market, but nevertheless the Russian financial market infrastructure was able to continue without them. So I do assess the work done by the central bank over the past 10 years as top-notch, underscoring such mega successes as financial infrastructure, digital services that took on that the central bank took on as the function instead of the market, and the kind of the digital ruble initiative is really very commendable. Now, developing the new sectors, such as the rating services, we need to do more here and turn other sectors do better, such as the price aggregators and pricing agencies. I mean, the plan is quite clear. So we are waiting for the legislation to be put out that would be aimed at it. Another success is making the market better and cleaner, because not all of the market segments passed this procedure simultaneously. It all began with the biggest part of it, which was the banking sector, and all the rest either followed suit or will do so. Certainly a big part was consumer rights protection, since the risks produced by the new product do have this reverse side in terms of non-qualified citizens enduring losses. It doesn't mean that everything is ideal, nevertheless, and that we have reached a certain 100% result. It's the main guidelines, and there are certain areas that we've been able to turn out certain failures. In your introductory word, you mentioned that the stock market here leaves much to be desired. 25%, you mentioned the level of GDP capitalization, is a very low performance indicator, which slides down, which is quite a failure. The stock market structure doesn't conform to the GDP structure, without mentioning this full fiasco in the IPO area, just a very few of them. We understand why, but at the same time, I do think that the central bank and the government, as well as the financial authorities, should focus upon this particular area in their future priorities. The national pension funds, regrettably, didn't turn to be the main source of funding, comparing our country with other countries where you find 50%. Now, 2% of the GDP insurance, which is really not worth of this country's statute and this country's financial market. Similarly, I would like to mention that along with the fact that both the central bank and the financial authorities and the legislatures in this country are keeping abreast of times, trying to improve our legal system, but at times we're being a bit chaotic about it. I can quote a recent example from the last few months: regulating retail lending. When we are regulating it with several tools through the cost of money, the key rate, the consumer lending legislation that we are toughening every time, macroprudential limitations, which is the kind of an instrument that the central bank has in its kit, and the risk weighting. So if we take a look at this complex regulation, we understand that we put in changes into this consumer regulation 6 times over the past half year. So on average, it was once in a month and a half that this regulation changed. The same applies to the qualified investors, something they're talking about right now. Tightening the station towards the qualified investors means that either we've been slipping on the job without producing a good system that would clearly discriminate between the qualified and non-qualified ones, or what it is that we have been guided by when we are planning to raise the bar 4 times up. So this kind of extremities is what we need to put an end to, and think harder about changes in the regulation in order to make them not as frequent but with a better quality. So the release kind of an approach that the central bank is talking about is exactly aimed at it, this kind of an outcome. So that is what I believe we should be focused upon in the future and do it all together. It's a very rare occasion when I would like to come back with a very positive feedback after such a comment, but I can't put myself to it. I do agree with this dramatic emphasis that you shared with us, and the statistic, but I must say that what we have on our agenda is to solve some very large-scale challenges, to bring in retail investors who were able to save this country's market with non-resident investors leaving it. And that is the result of the joint efforts put in by the Central Bank and the Ministry of Finance, with its well-thought-out system to incentivize investment in the financial market, well-thought-out, balanced approach to categorize investors, the kind of a compromise that we achieved in 2019 between the Central Bank and the industry after some very heated debates, I would say, and many other decisions which created the foundation of such very effective and strong measures. And I absolutely agree with Alexei and Vladimir, who said that we shall find the proper decisions via a dialogue, which is going to be not less effective than the ones that we've been able to identify so far. Now, with your permission, I would ask Anatoly Aksakov the same kind of question to you as a legislature. What kind of initiatives you should expect the regulators to do, and how do you see the basic task for the financial market development over the next decade? Good afternoon. Today is Nikolai's birthday. I would like to congratulate him and wish him health, happiness, and financial future and successful future for the financial markets. And today is also the day of knowledge and education. Back in my days in the Moscow University, I was taught that the matter is primary, intellect is secondary, that it is the material that is before the mind. And so relying upon these lessons by Karl Marx, I would say that if the material output is not going to develop, the mind is not going to follow suit. So this material output should have and follow respective ambitions. I feel like we've really covered ourselves with a lot of protective measures, responding to certain threats which emerge every now and then. So I would say that the time has come when we need to move much faster forward and set in front of ourselves the most ambitious kinds of tasks and objectives for those who are going to consume our financial services and products. And that is why this regional financial economics is something, as myself being representative of a great nation, gives me a bit of a shallow feeling. Russia is a great country, and so to speak about certain regional financial market, even though it is not in the best of conditions right now, I would say is not right. Because we need to set the kind of task bearing in mind the general geopolitical situation, which is to become the leading financial market in the world, for which purpose one must create the necessary conditions. So one must not hesitate to be ambitious, because the foreign investors, American, European ones, again, following the Karl Marx taste money, he will come into the Russian market because the profits that they would be able to enjoy in this very fast-growing market will create a much better opportunity than in the Western market. So I suggest that we should all be proactive rather than reactive, and do everything in order for this market to develop as fast as possible. Certainly, what we count upon that the legislation covering oil and gas and the pension fund will stimulate the inflow of household savings into the market, into the securities market, financial market. But again, you need to move faster by changing the legislation and the way the government pension funds operate, so that the pensioners' money should enter into this market. We've been shuffling our feet for so long. Thank God, I'm hearing now people say that the 3-year investments are going to remain the 3-year long ones, rather than switch over to bring into it the money from the non-government pension funds, which is going to be longer than the 3-year period. That makes me feel happy, but I do believe that we need to take a look at the way the system is going to function, allowing for such an outcome that when we launch this product, the investors may not respond to it in such a favorable manner. So we need to keep our finger on the beat and be able to respond to the way the market evolves. So it's basically everything that we're working on. I don't want to repeat what I've previously heard or said. And so the specific takeaway is that we need to set ourselves the most ambitious task, because our financial market has demonstrated that it can successfully resist the hardest of sanctions. So the market is functioning irrespective of the difficulties that it has to navigate through, ready to move on, but we have to set ourselves more ambitious objectives, because this country is facing the challenge of being able to demonstrate how one can break through the toughest sanctional regimes one can imagine. Thank you very much, Anatoly. Yes, you know, I do agree that what we lack towards this level of ambition in our discussion, and we're quite appreciative of you, Anatoly, for adding this ambitiousness. But do you have any specific wishes or recommendations with respect to what we as an industry or the central bank need to do? Where do you see the biggest problems that require attendance? Well, that's how I said it, that we need to move faster, to introduce and execute the kind of ideas which are aimed at reforming non-government pension funds. And I believe that one should take a closer look also at the IPO procedures in order to simplify it as much as possible and make sure that all who can or want can access the market. For example, we're starting the budget discussion for the next year, and so we might soon be talking about reducing investments into various non-pension funds. So they might serve as the one which might substitute government funding in many projects. I'm right now in the Republic of Czechoslovakia, and I would say that in this non-natural resource region is able to turn out a lot of output, which means that there is a lot of potential, a lot of capacities which point to the economic development really having covered a lot of ground. So we need to work with the government so that the very systemic project endeavor to be more effective. And of course, such project will require funding, and such funding may either come from the local sources or the federal system may provide for that, but the best source is the market. And the stock market may become such a source, if not the main source for long-term economic finance. Anatoly, thank you so much. Well, the next thing, which is quite logic, since we've been mentioning the non-government pension fund sector so frequently, to pass the floor over to Sergei Belyakov. Sergei? The previous speakers referred to an insignificant, regrettably insignificant, role that this industry plays in the financial market of this country, which is not at par in terms of the long-term financial market development ambitions. So what's your take on the concept that the non-government pension funds should become the primary beneficiary, which is a long-term savings concept. Is it possible to count upon a higher level of activity on for the non-government pension funds? Myself, as a representative of the stock market, I should say that we're very much short of institutional investors being active. The nearest ones that we see is the non-government pension funds. So my question is, can we hope for the non-government pension funds to become more active in the stock market thanks to the efforts that so far are being undertaken? Sergey? Yes, so thank you so much, and everybody, good afternoon. I do join in everyone who has congratulated Nikolai on his birthday. Happy birthday, Nikolai. I would say this is quite fortuitous that we are celebrating the Megaregulator's anniversary. And so let me begin by saying that the panelists who represent the Bank of Russia, the Minister of Finance, the upper and the lower chambers of the Russian Parliament, happily for the financial market participants, and definitely in my case, are being most consistent in their policies. It is really important because the consistency in the development of any area is the key success factor. And what we have been observing, I mean, the past 10 years and a bit even longer than that, has been a consistent effort put into the development of the financial market, creating a set of stimuli for the households to participate in it. And so the question arises, is it sufficient or not? I feel that whenever we talk about the non-government pension fund as a sector, comparing it with other financial market players, we do not completely understand the specifics of the pension market. And its specifics are in it being a strategic and institutional, but at the same time, one of the most conservative kinds of investors. Alexei, fast forward, let me start by answering a question about raising the level of investments into the shares. We have analyzed the global pension market, including OECDs and non-OECD countries, and everywhere we see a very static landscape, which shows that the share of investment into the stocks is lower than into the less riskier instruments like the bonds. And the dynamics over the past several years proves that people prefer to invest not into shares, but into other instruments. And that makes us think, are we not too exaggerating, because the low requirement placed upon the structure of the pension fund's portfolio towards the way these portfolios are being managed by the management entities as well as the pension funds themselves created the environment of trust, and the people get the most important thing that they are entitled to from the non-government pension system, which is a guaranteed protection of their savings. And this is not just the pure specifics of the motivation guiding Russian investors. Several years ago, a survey was conducted in the European Union, and one of the questions in that survey was, what do you pay attention to when making a decision whether to save money from your pension individually apart from the government system? Is it the income or the security? People said security. It doesn't mean that being able to generate more income is not important, but the priorities were expressed that way. And so the way that the non-government pension funds in the world provide for the security of the savings shows that one of the instruments in such a security is selecting more conservative papers. In the Russian environment, there are several more factors. Alexei mentioned them and Vladimir mentioned them, which is the issuers' behaviors and certain pretense at the exclusivity, which doesn't create the predictability neither in their overall operation or the dividend policy, creating this kind of feeling of unpredictability and the dependence upon the regulator's attitude towards a specific situation or case. And this is a second important point that I would like to draw your attention to when choosing between the rules which are characteristic for every everybody and all the time on the one hand, as well as an alternative, which is a certain policy of exceptions for major players. So the choice should be in favor of the rules which govern everyone and every place, without making exceptions for any issuer having claims at the greater exclusivity, be it a major government player or major market player, but all the rest of the players as well. And so I might say that this is one of the reasons when people don't have a lot to choose from in terms of the targets. Speaking about the infrastructure, we don't have too much of a capitalization and very little list of issues that really don't have a big choice to make. Another aspect which describes the specificity of the pension funds, which has already been raised quite appropriately, and I would make additional emphasis on it, the question about the household incomes. Is there a source for the household to participate in the non-government pension program? And so the whole of the pension system, basically, the pension funds as opposed to the brokers, this is not an instrument to earn more income. This is not the way to improve the well-being for the category which is affluent and by taking big risks are trying to generate bigger effect from the current status by being able to have a certain appetite. This is for the less secure social categories, and that is why the policy pursued by the Megaregulator and by similar regulators in the world, that's why they impose such requirements upon pension funds. And so we manage quite a big mass of resources gathered from a big number of customers in little values, and that imposes upon us higher expectations compared to the other players in the financial market. That is something that is important to be understood. Now, in terms of the next 10 years, in my expectations, I will try and answer the question that you raised in the very beginning. I would like the financial market development agenda not only to be the central bank's agenda, not only the Minister of Finance agenda or the core Russian Parliament's committee. We have some very good experience when back in 2005, the reform included into itself a very big segment of the financial market development, which stimulated, incentivized retail investors to participate in the market. It was effective then, and because that sounds as quite a retrospective look at the events of the remote past, we currently are ripping the cream from those activities. But there's another good example, long-term savings, and the law which was put together to support it, like to increase the level of guarantees covering the money invested into the non-government pension funds up to 8 million. So throughout the second quarter, we witnessed changes in two key indicators. The number of customers who came into the non-government pension system, not expressed in millions, unfortunately, but the trend, just within 1 quarter, when a very proper campaign of awareness was raised, and the decision in itself was a correct one, allows us to speak about the trend which may sustain, as well as the amount of money which is currently in the management of non-government, by the management of non-government pension funds, as well as in the government pension system. And the very last point, the non-government pension system, thanks to the Minister of Finance and the Central Bank, because I'm saying it because I know how much personal effort was put into it by those sitting on the panel, so as to make the package of laws that we used to have before and the one that is currently being reviewed by the Parliament to be made effective. So when we talk about the replacement ratio term, the one that we've become very tired of, without creating the current demand to create one's future pension. It is a significant thing, because if you take a look at the government pension just now, the government pension replacement ratio is very low in many countries. But whenever it is a high one, the quality of life is higher one, and it's never enough. And that is why the government policy actively incentivizes the development of the non-government pension system. There are two models, the mandatory one and the voluntary one. In the non-government pension support, they can be successful or not successful, irrespective of their mandatory nature or the voluntary nature. But whenever it is taking off, whenever there is a provider available, whenever you have targets to invest into, the aggregate replacement ratio reaches 80% and never goes below 57%. In our case, it is 39%. If you are to round up the government pension, as well as the pension that is enjoyed by those who were able to save and put money into the non-government pension system. So the task is to develop the non-government pension system, to raise the level of trust not only to the government pension system, thanks to the regulators who were able to achieve it, but also to the stock market. And I shall finish by saying that the stock market must become the development priority, because unfortunately this market, as well as the government policy, are being impacted by non-economic kind of events. And so I would like to wish that this should be a dominant kind of a target. Sergei, thank you so much. Honestly, I would like to count upon a greater activity by the non-pension funds in the stock market and other areas, which I believe to be the guarantee for the income to grow and for the replacement ratio to be higher, and would propel many of us to support the retail investors in our endeavors. Because if it doesn't happen, then I would say that the non-government pension fund won't be able to demonstrate neither this or that, nor third. But we're very hopeful that the kind of efforts currently being demonstrated, they would allow this industry to become a much more significant institutional player in the Russian market as an investor. I would like to suggest now that as next Vladimir Verkhoshinsky should say a word, because to me he represents the banking industry, although Alpha Bank is not just a bank, which is also a professional player in the securities market, but he is right here, and he, in my mind, represents the biggest sector in the financial market. And so if we are to compare the assets held by the retail investors in the stock market, we compare it with the amount of deposits, and the fact that about a quarter of the amount of deposits have there makes us really feel quite happy. But it is the banks who are the most important financial institutions and shall always remain the most important ones. Yes, so they should keep their place, but it seems to me that sometime back in 2006, the banks felt that their assets were a bit excessive. They saw the profit margins going down in their core activity without being able to convert them into the traditional banking instruments, and started looking for entries into other kinds of financial markets. So what kind of next 10 years is going to be for the banking industry, and what do you expect, Vladimir? Well, Anatoly Exakov, he added a lot of ambition into this discussion, so let me try and add more optimism and a bit more confidence in what we're facing. Everybody has been talking about the stock market as part of the financial market. Without doubt, it is important to develop it further. That constitutes an important part of the national economics, but the stock market, being such not a very sizable one. Why? Because we have a big banking sector, a big, successful, powerful banking sector, and this is particularly good news if you talk not about the past decade, but about the next one. Whenever people say banks, they say this is the bloodstream of the economy, loans and deposits. Well, quite clearly so. That is important in itself, but I would say that the role by the banks, I hope that you would agree with me, is considerably broader than just the deposits and the lending. Let me explain. I identify three major aspects. First off, the banks right now, and Vladimir already used this term, locomotive. The banks act as a locomotive of the economic digitalization. We have super advanced digital services that the bank is offering. I'm sure that many of you some time ago used to open up foreign accounts and you traveled abroad to use digital accounts, and then you came back and you caught yourself thinking all of a sudden how well advanced our digital system is. We were the first banking company that after the lockdown was welcomed by a lot of digital giants in China when we went there. There are so many cool things in terms of the engineering and development, but as far as digitalization and algorithm in the banking service, I used to say before that Russia is one of the most advanced nations, I would say, after China. Now, after my visit to China, I can tell you we're #1 in the world from the point of view of digitalization in the banking, financial, and financial-like services. So what happens now is that in the past, such companies as Yandex and Mail, they set the digital agenda in the country. Nowadays, with the support from the central bank, we already voted for the Vladimir Komlev and Olga. They made what they made, the Ministry of Digital Communication and Development. But it is the banks right now, Alpha, Sber, Tinkoff, VTB, are pushing the digital agenda, digitalization, business processes, AI, big language models. And this is not just boasting, this is the fact. We are the excellence center, we are the R&D center, and that covers all other sectors. And I believe that really should be pushed further and further. Because, as I said, first of all, apart from the fact that we are offering loans and deposits. Secondly, competing for customers not only in the retail area, but also in the small and medium-sized businesses, we started offering such a thing, which used to be called business incubators. 5 years ago, there was this government task of setting up business incubators. Right now, the Alpha banks and other advanced banks platforms for the SMEs, these are real business incubators, because SME customer of a Russian bank are able to remotely incorporate companies with legal services, accounting services, HR services, coaching services. You can do anything you want through such a remote platform on the advanced platforms that the Russian banks are offering. And SMEs is everything to us right now under the conditions of the sanctions. And so this kind of a platform for the small and medium entrepreneurs were created by the banks, and that enables our SMEs to flourish. Now, the third aspect is a bit less meaningful, but I also believe it is important, nevertheless, and the fact that the banks maintain this communication between the federal center and the regions, because we all have a very well-developed network. Some call their regional offices as affiliates, no matter. So the banks do carry well-advanced experience down into the regional realm. Separately, what I like to see is that in Alpha we decided not to contract the number of our offices, but to grow them. We're going into the smaller cities. Before the end of the year, we'll open more than 300 digital offices with digital technologies, with red ceilings. In August, in my native city of Tarusa, in the Kaluga region, we opened up the office. Honestly, I didn't have any connection to that. It's local employees, they decided to do that. But in a city with 10,000 people, opening up a digital office of an Alpha Bank, it's like an extraterrestrials landing down from the high stars. And so in itself, that was a meaningful event in these municipal economics. And so the banks like that are taking everything they have in terms of the modern progressive down into the regions, establishing this linkage, this communication network in this great country. So indeed we are the bloodstream of the country, and the stock market is also important, of course. But for the next 10 years, we have the banks who are locomotives pushing digitalization, who become the platforms for an easy and fast growth for the small and medium businesses connecting Moscow and regions. And I believe this is a very solid kind of an exoskeleton that the national economics should use. But in the meantime, you can develop the pension funds and all kinds of other securities markets. Many thanks to you. Well, dear friends and dear colleagues, before finishing, I would like to congratulate our Megaregulator on its 10th year anniversary. I'm an individual who was filled with all kinds of doubts during the days when the discussions took place, so it is with great pleasure I am offering my congratulations. I'm very happy to see the cooperation that we are united in, and I do ascertain the great efficiency of this industry in cooperation with the Megaregulator. Allow me on your behalf also to thank our speakers for their participation and you, of course, for your attention. Thank you so much.